Chief Justice John Roberts screamed at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on live TV, his face red, his voice cracking with fury. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned in, exposed his hypocrisy with one brutal question, and left the nation speechless. What did she say that shattered the Supreme Court's illusion of untouchable power? Keep watching. Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. Capitol Hill. Tuesday morning, a special emergency hearing has drawn a full chamber and a press gallery packed shoulder to shoulder. The issue: a deeply confidential Supreme Court ruling that effectively ends federal protection for reproductive rights for minors. The cameras are already rolling when the unthinkable happens. Chief Justice John Roberts enters the chamber unannounced. Roberts wasn't on the official witness list. His appearance is unprecedented. He walks in slowly, every step radiating entitlement, carrying the full weight of the Supreme Court's perceived infallibility. He's not here to testify. He's here to intimidate. At the witness table sits Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, collected, prepared. A former criminal defense attorney from Texas, she's here to represent the voices no one in that ruling considered. Scared children, poor families, real Americans with no power. Roberts is granted the floor. He speaks in the same polished tone he's used for years: lofty language, constitutional jargon, legal detachment. Crockett listens silently, eyes focused, notes in hand. When it's her turn, she doesn't raise her voice. Instead, she asks one question. One surgical question that cuts through every abstraction. If your ruling forces a 14-year-old rape victim to carry her attacker's child, do you call that constitutional or compassionate? Roberts snaps. His voice rises. His jaw clenches. Congresswoman, you are out of your depth. Someone like you shouldn't be questioning this court. Gasps echo across the room. Journalists freeze. Phones start recording. And Crockett, without blinking, calmly replies, "Thank you, Chief Justice. You just proved my entire point." 10 minutes later, the clip is everywhere. Someone like you trends globally. The man meant to embody restraint just detonated in front of America. And the woman he tried to silence? She didn't even flinch. Chief Justice John Roberts once stood as the last thread holding together the crumbling illusion of an apolitical Supreme Court. Appointed in 2005 by President George W. Bush, he entered with the reputation of a careful jurist, a man who prized stability, precedent, and the dignity of the court above all else. With his silver hair, buttoned-up suits, and calm voice, he became the embodiment of judicial restraint. He spoke of calling balls and strikes, not rewriting the rule book. But behind the robes and rehearsed restraint was something far more fragile. Over the past decade, Roberts has authored or backed decisions that radically shifted American law. He voted to gut the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County v. Holder, arguing that protections for minority voters were no longer needed, a decision immediately followed by a wave of voter suppression laws. He wrote the majority opinion in Citizens United, opening the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending in politics. And most recently, he joined a ruling that stripped federal reproductive protections from minors, forcing girls as young as 13 to carry pregnancies to term in some states. Roberts portrays these decisions as impartial constitutional interpretation, but to many Americans, especially those from marginalized communities, they read as ideological warfare masked in legal language. And as public confidence in the court plummeted, Roberts found himself in a lonely position, clinging to the illusion of neutrality in a courtroom many now see as rigged. Internally, sources say he's become increasingly isolated. The right no longer sees him as reliably conservative. The left views him as the architect of a morally hollow institution. And the public? They see a man more interested in preserving the court's image than confronting its consequences. Roberts isn't just presiding over a declining institution, he is its reflection, controlled, polished, but crumbling beneath the pressure. Before she was a congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett was a defense attorney in Texas, the kind who didn't flinch in courtrooms, packed with prosecutors, cops, and judges ready to crush the powerless. She didn't come from a political dynasty. She came from East Dallas, and everything about her, from the cadence of her voice to the fire in her eyes, still carries that courtroom energy. Crockett made her name defending the kinds of people institutions forget: poor clients, black clients, young girls charged as adults for surviving trauma no child should face. She walked into courtrooms with manila folders full of receipts and walked out with dismissals and reduced sentences. Not because the system was fair, but because she forced it to be. Every cross-examination was surgical, every objection calculated. When she stepped into Congress, she brought that same discipline and a mission. That mission sharpened the moment the Supreme Court handed down its ruling stripping reproductive protections from minors. Crockett didn't just read the opinion. She heard the names of girls she once represented echoing between the lines. 14-year-olds raped by relatives, 15-year-olds forced to give birth in shelters, children judged before they were protected. For Crockett, this wasn't academic. It was personal. She knew what those rulings meant. Not in theory, but in practice. She had sat beside girls in holding cells. She had held the hands of mothers who feared for their daughters. So when she looked across the hearing room at Chief Justice Roberts, she wasn't seeing a title. She was seeing a man who had never had to explain to a child why justice didn't apply to her. Her style isn't about volume or spectacle. It's about precision. Crockett doesn't throw punches. She lands them with calm facts and killer timing. And in this hearing, she just needed to ask the right questions and wait for Roberts to reveal who he really was. The atmosphere in the hearing chamber was dense with anticipation. Cameras buzzed quietly, journalists perched on the edge of their seats. At the witness table, Chief Justice John Roberts sat upright, his posture rigid, his expression perfectly composed, just like the thousands of appearances before. But today was different. Today, his legacy was on trial. Roberts opened his remarks with mechanical clarity. This court, in its recent decision, acted in full accordance with constitutional tradition, he said, voice steady and devoid of emotion. Our role is not to legislate morality or dictate policy preferences. It is to interpret the law as framed by the founders. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett listened without blinking. Dressed sharply, her notes precise, she exuded a controlled intensity. As Roberts recited a defense rooted in originalist legal doctrine, Crockett reached for her microphone. "Chief Justice," she said smoothly, "what does original intent mean to a 14-year-old girl forced to give birth after being raped?" A gasp moved through the room like a gust of wind. Roberts stopped mid-sentence. He didn't respond right away. He blinked, once, and tried to maintain composure. "I'm sorry, Congresswoman," he replied, tilting his head. Crockett leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "You mentioned constitutional tradition. I'm asking, what tradition compels a child to suffer lifelong consequences for an act of violence committed against her?" Roberts shifted uncomfortably. "The Constitution does not provide for emotional interpretation, Congresswoman. It delineates authority." "So where in the Constitution," Crockett pressed, "does it say that a minor's trauma is irrelevant to her rights?" Whispers rippled through the audience. Senators exchanged glances. Committee staffers stopped typing. Roberts took a breath, tightened his jaw. "The Constitution is not a fluid document, no matter how sympathetic the case." Crockett held her gaze firm. "Maybe not fluid, Chief Justice, but interpretation? That's always been fluid, when it suited power." Another wave of murmurs. Roberts' lip twitched. The mask of control was slipping, and Crockett knew it. Roberts tried to recover his footing. He adjusted his papers, cleared his throat, and pivoted back to formalism. "Congresswoman, if we abandon textual fidelity in favor of emotional appeals, we risk undermining the very foundation of constitutional governance." But Crockett wasn't letting go. "Chief Justice," she said calmly, "I was a criminal defense attorney for over a decade. I've stood beside 15-year-old girls shackled in courtroom chains. I've had to explain to them why men in suits decided their pain didn't matter. So let me ask you directly, what's your ruling say to them?" Roberts looked cornered but forced out a response. The ruling restores states' rights to determine their own standards for medical exceptions. It does not outlaw care. Crockett raised an eyebrow. Except in states where legislators use your ruling as justification to outlaw it entirely, even in cases of incest or rape. Roberts held steady for a moment longer. That's a legislative matter, not judicial. She didn't blink. Then I suppose we should ask, would this ruling apply to your daughters? The chamber fell dead silent. Roberts froze. His jaw clenched. His hands, folded a moment ago, now gripped the table's edge. That's not an appropriate question, he said, voice low but strained. It's the most appropriate question, Crockett countered. Because what we're debating here isn't theory, it's children. So yes, I'm asking if your own daughter were 14, raped, and denied care in a post-Roberts America, would you still defend this ruling as constitutional clarity? Roberts stood up slightly in his chair, nostrils flared. Don't you dare bring my family into this, he snapped. The mask was gone. Don't you dare, he repeated, louder, as staffers turned their heads and cameras zoomed in. Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned back, letting the moment breathe. I brought them into it, she said softly, because you already brought every other daughter into this country into it, without asking any of their names. The silence that followed was suffocating. For 5 full seconds, no one spoke. The hearing room wasn't just quiet, it was suspended in time. Robert's jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles along his neck pulsed visibly. His voice, when it came, was no longer composed. It was a barely controlled growl. You're out of your depth, he said through gritted teeth. Someone like you doesn't understand judicial restraint. Gasps rippled across the room. Not whispers, not murmurs, gasps. Crockett slowly turned her head. Her face remained calm, but her eyes locked on Roberts with surgical precision. Someone like me? She echoed. Roberts, already standing halfway out of his chair, froze. His face turned pale, his lips parted, as if he could somehow undo what he'd just said. But the words were already echoing across live streams, trending on Twitter, clipped on TikTok. Let me clarify, he stammered. You meant exactly what you said, Crockett interrupted. Her voice wasn't angry. It was something worse. Calm, deliberate, and devastating. You meant someone who looks like me, someone who didn't go to Harvard or Yale, someone who doesn't belong in your country club version of justice. Roberts sat back down, but it was too late. You wrote a decision that will haunt an entire generation of girls, Crockett continued, her tone steady and unrelenting. You used the Constitution as a weapon, not a shield. And when asked to justify that harm, your instinct was not legal defense, it was to insult, diminish, and lash out. The room remained breathless. And now, Chief Justice, she said, folding her hands on the table in front of her, America has seen who you really are. Not the robe, not the institution, just a man. A man scared of accountability, scared of questions, scared of someone like me. The gavel slammed. Chairman Jordan declared a recess. But the confrontation was already over. And the verdict, at least in the court of public opinion, had already been rendered. Roberts froze. His jaw clenched. His hands, folded a moment ago, now gripped the table's edge. That's not an appropriate question, he said, voice low but strained. It's the most appropriate question, Crockett countered, because what we're debating here isn't theory, it's children. So yes, I'm asking, if your own daughter were 14, raped and denied care in a post-Roberts Americata, would you still defend this ruling as constitutional clarity? Roberts stood up slightly in his chair, nostrils flared. Don't you dare bring my family into this, he snapped. The mask was gone. Don't you dare, he repeated, louder, as staffers turned their heads and cameras zoomed in. Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned back, letting the moment breathe. "I brought them into it," she said softly, "because you already brought every other daughter into this country into it, without asking any of their names." The silence that followed was suffocating. For 5 full seconds, no one spoke. The hearing room wasn't just quiet, it was suspended in time. Robert's jaw clenched so tight the muscles along his neck pulsed visibly. His voice, when it came, was no longer composed. It was a barely controlled growl. "You're out of your depth," he said through gritted teeth. "Someone like you doesn't understand judicial restraint." Gasps rippled across the room. Not whispers, not murmurs, gasps. Crockett slowly turned her head. Her face remained calm, but her eyes locked on Robert's with surgical precision. "Someone like me," she echoed. Roberts, already standing halfway out of his chair, froze. His face turned pale, his lips parted, as if he could somehow undo what he'd just said. But the words were already echoing across live streams, trending on Twitter, clipped on TikTok. "Let me clarify," he stammered. "You meant exactly what you said," Crockett interrupted. Her voice wasn't angry. It was something worse. Calm, deliberate, and devastating. "You meant someone who looks like me. Someone who didn't go to Harvard or Yale. Someone who doesn't belong in your country club version of justice." Robert sat back down, but it was too late. "You wrote a decision that will haunt an entire generation of girls," Crockett continued, her tone steady and unrelenting. "You used the Constitution as a weapon, not a shield, and when asked to justify that harm, your instinct was not legal defense, it was to insult, diminish, and lash out." The room remained breathless. "And now, Chief Justice," she said, folding her hands on the table in front of her, "America has seen who you really are. Not the robe, not the institution, just a man. A man scared of accountability, scared of questions, scared of someone like me." The gavel slammed. Chairman Jordan declared a recess. But the confrontation was already over. And the verdict, at least in the court of public opinion, had already been rendered. The room was still vibrating from Robert's explosion, but Jasmine Crockett? She didn't flinch. She didn't shout back. She didn't lean on fury. She prosecuted. "Chief Justice Roberts," she began, her tone cool and surgical. "You just raised your voice at a sitting member of Congress. I won't do the same to you. I don't need to." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on him. "Because I've been in courtrooms. I've defended children your rulings abandon." Robert's lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. Crockett didn't give him room to regain control. "In Dallas, I represented a 13-year-old girl who was assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. She came to me in tears, scared, pregnant, alone." Crockett's voice didn't waver. Her case didn't need theoretical debates about constitutional originalism. She needed help. She needed options. She needed protection. Flashbulbs went off. Journalists' fingers were flying across keyboards, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't performing. She was testifying. "Child," she continued, "was failed by the system every step of the way, and now this court, under your leadership, wants to codify that failure nationwide." Robert stared at her like she had struck him. Crockett wasn't done. "You say I lack understanding of constitutional law, but I say you lack experience with constitutional consequence." She paused, and in that silence, you could hear the sound of a courtroom flipping its power. "You've never sat across from a child who doesn't know what her body is doing, who can't sleep, who blames herself, who asks, 'Am I going to die?'" Her voice lowered but grew heavier. "I have." Her hand rested lightly on the witness table, fingers tapping softly, precisely. "You've written rulings that shape lives from 10,000 feet. I've fought in the trenches, Chief Justice. That's where the law, isn't abstract, it's breath and blood and trauma. Across the room, members of the public, parents, teachers, survivors, were nodding silently. Tears in some eyes, fury in others. Crockett's tone stayed even. You don't have to respect me, sir. But I do expect you to respect the lives your rulings impact. Another beat. Another silence. She turned her attention back to the full committee. And for anyone still wondering why this moment matters, she said, it's because the highest court in this country forgot what justice is supposed to look like, and someone had to remind it. Then she turned back to Roberts. There's someone, she said, was always going to be someone like me. The tension in the hearing room was thick enough to slice. Jasmine Crockett had shifted the terrain entirely. But she wasn't finished. Not even close. She straightened her papers with quiet deliberation, then looked up again. Chief Justice, you said I crossed a line by mentioning your family, but I didn't mention them to score points. I mentioned them because policy becomes personal, the moment it walks through your front door. A few members of the committee shifted uncomfortably. Roberts stiffened. He didn't interrupt, but his jaw clenched hard. Your daughters, Crockett said gently, are adopted. They're loved, sheltered, respected, and that is beautiful. A long pause. Now imagine they weren't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She let the words sit like a mirror, forcing Roberts to look at what he didn't want to see. Imagine. They were born into poverty, in a rural state with no hospital for 100 miles. Imagine they were assaulted, and then told by a judge, quoting your ruling, that they'd have to carry that trauma to term. No questions, no exceptions. Roberts looked down for the first time. Crockett pressed on. We cannot cherry-pick humanity based on privilege, and that is what your ruling does. It shields those who already have shields. It punishes the most vulnerable. Girls without lawyers, without parents, without options. The chair tried to speak. Crockett held up one finger. Not in defiance, in resolve. Chairman, I promise I will yield shortly. But the Chief Justice brought ideology to this chamber. I brought facts. I intend to finish my case. She turned back to Roberts. I'm not here to win a soundbite. I'm here to ask what no one else seems willing to ask. Another pause. Every camera was fixed on her. When did precedent become more important than people? Roberts looked pale now. No red left in his face. Only the blank expression of a man being publicly dismantled by someone he never thought would have the standing or the skill to do it. Crockett finished with precision. This isn't about you. It's about the lives your rulings leave behind. And no robe, no gavel, no title makes you immune from being asked the hard questions, especially by someone who spent her life answering them. For girls you've never met. She exhaled. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. That's not disrespect, that's responsibility. Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone, her voice low, measured, surgical. Chief Justice Roberts, I want to thank you, she began. Roberts looked up, his brows furrowing in confusion. Thank you for reminding this country what this court has become. Not a temple of justice, but a shelter for ideology. Not a guardian of the people, but a gatekeeper for the privileged. The room was silent. No one moved. Reporters stared at her, pens frozen. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. You screamed, she continued, locking eyes with him. I prosecuted. 5 words. 5 syllables of poetic destruction. A phrase that would soon ripple across TikTok, Twitter, and television screens. You told me I was out of my depth, that someone like me didn't belong in this conversation. But Chief Justice, I belong here more than ever, because unlike you, I've stood in real courtrooms. I've defended real children, and I don't need a robe to understand justice. I just need the courage to speak. Roberts sat motionless. His hands were still clasped, but now they trembled slightly. Crockett wasn't done. "Our doesn't excuse you from accountability. In fact, it demands more of you. But what you showed today was contempt. Not for me, but for the very people you claim to serve." She looked directly into the cameras now. Every girl watching this, every mother, every survivor, they saw it. They heard it. The arrogance, the dismissal, the pain masked in legal jargon. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't waver. And if the highest court in the land can no longer hear those voices, then maybe it's time we ask whether it deserves to sit that high. The hearing room sat in suspended animation. No sound, no shuffling, just stunned, reverent silence. Then, slowly, Crockett leaned back in her chair. "I yield back my time." The gavel never came. The chairman never spoke. For a full 10 seconds, it was just the echo of her final words filling the chamber like a verdict. The clip hit social media within minutes. One caption read, "This is what courage looks like." Another, "The day the robe got torn off." But the one that stuck, the one that became a hashtag, a t-shirt, a headline, was the one spoken by Jasmine herself. He screamed, "I prosecuted." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Not just about the court, not just about the ruling, but about who gets to question power and how power responds when it's finally truly questioned. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett yielding back her time, the internet ignited. The clip of Chief Justice John Roberts screaming "someone like you" at a composed black congresswoman shattered every platform's algorithm. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like Kester Andre Jones, "someone like you," and Crockett Clapback exploded across the timeline. TikTok creators remixed the moment into skits, duets, and spoken word tributes. The phrase, "he screamed, I prosecuted," became a rallying cry overnight. CNN played the clip on loop during prime time. MSNBC dedicated a full hour to Crockett's poise and strategic dismantling of a legal titan. Even conservative outlets couldn't ignore the moment. Fox News, attempting damage control, aired a segment questioning whether Roberts had been baited, but even their panelists were visibly stunned by his outburst. Progressive leaders wasted no time speaking out. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "What Jasmine did today wasn't disrespect, it was accountability," and Roberts couldn't handle it. Senator Bernie Sanders added, "If Supreme Court justices can't answer questions without losing their cool, maybe they don't belong there." But the response wasn't entirely partisan. Senator Lisa Murkowski called Roberts' behavior deeply inappropriate for someone who claims to be the institutional anchor of the court. Meanwhile, legal scholars across the spectrum dubbed it the crack heard around the bench. Civil rights groups released statements praising Crockett's restraint and fire. The ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and NAACAC issued a joint statement. What we saw was not just a courtroom confrontation. It was a shift in American accountability. Law students across the country began organizing teach-ins and protests, framing the moment as proof that the Supreme Court was no longer untouchable. "If Jasmine Crockett can question power, so can we," read one fire at Georgetown Law. And through it all, Crockett stayed quiet. No gloating, no press tour. Just a single statement posted to her Instagram. "This wasn't about me. It was about them, the girls who deserved better than silence." Behind the scenes, panic spread through the judicial and political establishment. Within hours, editorials across major newspapers questioned whether Chief Justice Roberts could still command respect from the American public, or even his fellow justices. The Washington Post ran a front-page headline, "A Chief Uncloaked." The American Bar Association, rarely one to wade into political storms, issued a rare rebuke. Judicial temperament is the bedrock of legal legitimacy. Yesterday's display undermines the dignity of our highest court. Harvard law students, where Roberts once served on the Board of Overseers, staged a walkout, Dozens gathered on campus holding signs reading "Someone like us" and "This is why we need reform." Professors publicly called for an emergency ethics inquiry. The calls for recusal came fast. Legal watchdogs demanded that Roberts remove himself from all cases involving reproductive rights, gender discrimination, or racial bias. A petition on chain.org calling for his resignation garnered over 1.2 million signatures within 72 hours. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's campaign site crashed from traffic. Donations poured in, over $2,500,000, 0 cents raised in 48 hours, the majority from first-time donors. Comments accompanying the donations told a story. "You spoke for my daughter. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. This is who we've been waiting for." Media requests flooded her office. Netflix offered a documentary deal. Major publishing houses sent proposals for memoirs. HBO inquired about a mini-series, but Crockett declined every offer. Her only response? This wasn't personal. It was principle. Roberts issued a statement 2 days later, carefully worded, regretful in tone, but notably missing any real apology. "In the heat of an emotional hearing, I let my passion override my decorum. I reaffirm my lifelong commitment to judicial integrity." The reaction was tepid at best. Critics called it a non-apology written by a crisis consultant. Crockett, once seen as a freshman firebrand, was now regarded as a force of nature, and Roberts, the institutionalist who once saw himself as the guardian of the court's dignity, had become a cautionary tale. The collapse was not slow. It was immediate, unambiguous, and televised for the world to witness. This wasn't just a viral clip. It was a crack in the foundation of unchecked power. Chief Justice John Roberts, once the careful steward of judicial decorum, revealed the truth in real time, that even the highest robes could conceal deep fragility. He screamed not because he was challenged unfairly, but because someone like Jasmine Crockett had the courage to ask questions he could no longer dodge. And Crockett? She didn't scream. She didn't grandstand. She didn't flinch. She cross-examined the most powerful judge in America the same way she once fought for poor girls in courtrooms who had no one else. Calm, relentless, precise. She didn't win with volume. She won with clarity. In that moment, America witnessed what happens when experience meets entitlement and truth meets legacy. The woman they said didn't belong in that room proved she was the only one who understood exactly what the room was for. Roberts unraveled not because Crockett was unqualified, but because she was overqualified to expose the contradictions of his court. His meltdown wasn't personal, it was structural. A man who had ruled from a bench without being questioned finally found himself on the other end of the gavel. And the mask didn't just slip. It shattered. Today, law schools teach what happened that day as a turning point, the Crockett cross-exam. Her performance has become a case study in courage, professionalism, and how to confront a system that shields itself with tradition. It's more than a moment, it's a movement. Never confused silence with submission. Never confused robes with righteousness. Crockett didn't make Roberts lose control. He did that himself. She just asked the right questions and let the truth speak louder than power. So now we ask you, should Supreme Court justices face real-time public questioning like every other official? Should judicial power finally be answerable to the people it governs? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you believe in courage over comfort. Subscribe if you're ready for more. And stay tuned, because our next video uncovers a Supreme Court leak so explosive, even the White House was blindsided.